show you how to make continuous bias binding. So particularly useful for home decor projects. I used to use it all the time for soft furnishings. It strengthens seams around cushions. I would add as accent details. And continuous bias binding means that rather than joining lots and lots of pieces and having lots and lots of these seams, sometimes they're unsightly, you can have longer strips of bias which you put around your number 8 cord or whatever size of piping you want, and you can make lots and lots of it, and you can run it through the machine really quickly. It's a brain drain kind of project. Once you do it once or twice, it's really simple and it's really quick. It was actually a go-to thing that I used to do with curtains, and you'd make the stuff up, put it aside. If you've got scraps of fabric, this is a great thing to do, because there's nothing nicer than having bias binding in your stash. But with soft furnishing projects, you tend to make it that little bit wider. And last night I did need a 2-inch bias binding, and well, this is the project I made. Again, it was using scraps. So I made a couple of those. We're going to cut it from scrap fabric. So you need your scrap fabric, a friction pen, rotary cutter, and some kind of a ruler. A quilting ruler is ideal. Right, lay your fabric on the table, and you're going to work with the best bit that you possibly can. So, and you want to get as much out of it as possible. So let's just cut off what we don't need. I'm going to cut off the selvage. So now I am going to be accurate by doing this. But take off the selvage, turn your fabric around, even, and now I'm going to fold it again, so it means I can cut very evenly up here and along the top, always cutting away from yourself. 2 cuts. Just hug that rotary cutter in to the perspex. 1 square. And that fold, you'll have already given yourself a nice little line. This line is our bias. Okay, now you might have a bigger ruler. If not, you can cut along that line very carefully. In fact, that's what I'm going to do. I'm lining up that diagonal on my mat. Okay. Friction pen. 1 piece of fabric is going to stay on the mat. So this side and the opposite side are going to be joined together like so. So just flip this over, join it together, and if I can just show you, you are going to have a tiny little bit left over. So you're going to seam this 1/4 inch. So let me do that now. Okay. You're going to have little ends sticking out. Okay, you can just see that. Yeah, cut it off just as you would do with your normal bias binding. Press the seam open and you have a parallelogram. Have your seam vertical in front of you, and you are going to measure how much width-wise that you want of your bias strips. Take either your bias ruler, if you have one of those, or a long quilting ruler, like this. These are really useful. This one's 24 inches long. Lay it on your fabric. So I would like 2 inches wide. So I go to the mark that's 2 inches wide, and I place that line on that diagonal seam that's on my left. I'm sorry, this looks back to front to you. With that seam, you take your friction pen, and from the bottom of the fabric to the top, draw your lines. Do that across the fabric at 2-inch intervals until you're left with a little bit at the very end. In my case, that was about 1 inch. And can you see I've got lines all the way along the fabric? This is the bit that's smaller. So we're not going to use that. We might keep that for another project, but for now. Now across the top of the fabric, so fabric back in front of you, across the top to my right, camera down, draw a 1/4 inch seam, and bottom left, a 1/4 inch seam with your pen is going to be 0. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And we're going to take this line, ignore that point, this line, and call that 1, 2, 3, 4. Straightforward. And you'll think, of course I know how to number, but the 0 is important. Take this point farthest away from you, flip over your fabric, put a pin at that 1/4 inch line where the seam is, and take it over to the other 1/4 inch seam line where the number 1 is, where they intersect. Put in the pin, and you can see I'm going to have a little bit sticking out. Now you can see your lines across the top there and the top here. On this side I've got number 1, put the pin in, and it will join to number 2 on this side at that point there. If I give that fabric a little tug, that should meet up. Okay, so 1 goes to 2. Now that I've pinned it, if I give this fabric a little pull, ta-da, it's a bit of a tube. It is a tube. My golly, it's a tube. And it's got an ear on this side, and it's got a wee ear sticking out there. But I also got a row of pins. Go to your sewing machine, sew in a 1/4 inch seam. Do that now. Right, I have created this tube with the seam. At this point I would say iron the seam open, and I've used one of these clappers which has got this little bit here for pressing narrow seams, which is great, or you could use a yardstick, dowel, wooden dowel, whatever you've got, rolling pin. But just press the seam, because of the friction pen, obviously heat will take the marks away, and you want to keep those marks there, because what you're going to do now is take your handy scissors and start the cutting. It doesn't matter which side you start with. The strip that is narrow, this is about 3/4 of an inch wide, and you can see I'm just going to turn it. You could even just put it on the flat if it's easier for you to spread the fabric with your fingers. I love that sound. Is that just me? Do you like that sound? Seams are pressed open, and there's no little triangles to cut off on the edges, and there's no wonky joining of the seams, and it's the bias binding that keeps on giving. don't discard this bit. Unpick it and use it on any of your other wee projects, because it's bias, it's going to go around something. I use my hand. Hold the point. We're not stretching it, but it's not a bad idea when it comes to using your bias to give it a little press with a tiny bit of stretch. It's just the same sort of stretching you would do to elastic. If you have bias binding, it's even all the way around, it's quick, it's simple.